Hello crafty friends, welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to take one design idea and create 4 different cards for you. And I'm going to create them one stage at a time. So the first stage is stenciling straight onto a card blank. For my first card, I've got a large hexagon stencil. And what other colour for a hexagon stencil could I use than Wild Honey Distress Oxide? So that's what I chose. I blended some towards the left hand side of my card blank, concentrating the colour on the column that runs down about a third of the way in from the left. For my second card, I chose a large triangle repeating pattern stencil. And for this one, I used Kitsch Flamingo and stenciled that in an area towards the left again. I didn't go all the way from top to bottom this time. I just focused my blending around that third of the way in, third of the way down point. For my third card, I'm using Abandoned Coral and a Brickwork stencil. Instead of going horizontally with the brick design, I decided to go vertically, just for a bit of a change. And this time I did my stenciling down the right hand side, focusing the depth of colour on that third line, a third of the way in from the right. For my stenciling today, I decided not to use my grip mat, but to stick my stencil down with some sticky post-it tape, and that's because I didn't want to make the inside of my card blank mucky by sticking it on a not perfectly clean grip mat. And for my fourth and final card, I used a large diamond stencil and stenciled on some salty ocean. For stage 2, I wanted to add some art marks. Now, all art marks are marks, basically, some kind of dash, dot, spot, line, just something to add interest, maybe a bit of energy, maybe to create a visual triangle. So on my hexagon card, I took a chisel tip embossing pen and drew on some dashes. And then I sprinkled over some white embossing powder. Now, the chisel tip didn't really lay down enough embossing ink and the marks were a bit patchy. So I abandoned the chisel tip and grabbed a nice juicy brush tip and just went over them and then sprinkled on some more powder and heat set it, and that seemed to work really well. So I repeated that in 2 other hexagons to create a visual triangle. To add some more art marks, I took a bullet-tipped embossing pen this time and drew 3 circles along one side of a few hexagons. Then I sprinkled on some gold embossing powder and melted that with my heat tool, and that was the art marks for this card done. To add art marks to card number 2, I used some heat embossing but also grabbed one of my dot markers. This is a black dot marker, and I added 3 dots of different sizes in 3 different triangles, again to create that visual triangle. And then for the heat embossing this time, I used some splotchy mixed media type stamps and stamped them in embossing ink and then heat embossed them with white powder again. For card number 3, I started my art marks using a deco foil pen because I wanted to add some foil. So this pen has got glue in it, so I did, I think, 5 gluey dots in some of the bricks. And while that was drying, I got my Dr. P.H. Martin's bleed proof white ink and took a paintbrush and painted on some dashes again. This is a great little ink if you don't want your white to be tinted by the ink beneath it. So these white art marks stayed pretty white even though they were on water reactive distress oxides. I did have to set this aside to dry before I could do the foiling because I wanted the white to be dried so I didn't smudge it, although I did manage to smudge it. But I also needed those little dots of glue to be dry and tacky. The deco foil glue dries tacky, which means you can use this transfer foil to add foil on top. The glue grabs the foil off of the film and transfers it onto your project. For card 4, I did some more heat embossing. I used some little circle stamps stamped in embossing ink and then sprinkled on some gold embossing powder and melted that with my heat tool. And finally, I added some white Nouveau drops. I did 5 in a row in 2 of the diamonds and then 3 in a row in 1 diamond, just for a little bit of variation. So that was all the art marks done, and time to move on to stage 3, and that was to create a focal element. I knew that I wanted to add some foliage, but I wanted to put my foliage on something to help it stand out a bit. So I took some vellum, stuck it on some double-sided sticky adhesive sheet, and then cut some tags out of it. And then I put my tags in an embossing folder with an abstract circle pattern on it and ran that through my Cuttlebug, and that gave a lovely embossed texture to my tags. And the reason I did that was I didn't want the tags disappearing into the background because vellum is obviously translucent. I wanted it to be translucent but still have a bit of weight to it, and the embossed pattern gives it a more frosted, slightly more solid look in places. Whilst I was die cutting, I also cut out some foliage, a different type for each card. And to decorate my foliage, I decided to do some heat embossing. I didn't want them just to be white. I thought I'd do something a little bit different to usual. So I pressed all my foliages down into my embossing ink pad to cover them in embossing ink. And then I sprinkled over some gold embossing powder. I only lightly sprinkled this on because I wanted to also sprinkle on some white embossing powder so that my branches had a bit of, not mottled, that's not the right word, just a variegated, interesting look to them. Once my heat embossing was all cooled and set, I assembled my cards. Firstly, I stuck down the vellum tag, and then I added glue to the back of the foliage die cut using my glue dotter. If you want to know how to make a glue dotter, I do have a video linked below, so do check that out. I used high-tack PVA glue because it's a great glue for holding die cuts in place while the glue dries. They pretty much stay where you put them. I do like using matte gel medium because it dries matte and not shiny, so if any seeps out from underneath you don't get any of those shiny smears, but it's not very grippy, so if you accidentally knock your die cut before it's dry, it will move. So I'd love to know if you have a card making recipe that you follow from time to time or all the time. Do you have a set of stages that you like to work through when creating your cards? Do let me know in the comments. Right, and now we're on to stage 4, our last stage, and that is to add a sentiment. For my sentiments, I chose these cutout dies. I cut them from smooth white cardstock. I did put a bit of deli paper, just basic non-stick paper, between the card and the die before running it through my die cutting machine. And this just helps intricate die cuts like this to come out of the dies easily. It stops the fiddly bits getting stuck in the die. So once those were cut, I pressed them into my embossing ink pad and sprinkled over some more of that gold embossing powder and heated them with my heat tool. Once they were cooled and set, I put some high-tack PVA on my glass mat, spread it out with a glue spreader and dipped the sentiments into it. I then stuck them on another piece of white card and used my detail scissors to cut them out. I wanted to back the apertures in these sentiments so that the writing was clear. If I hadn't backed them, you'd be able to see through them to all the things going on in the background, and that might have made them less readable. But by backing them, I think they're more readable. To stick the sentiments down to the card, I just used some high-tack PVA. I did pop some card under some of the ends of the sentiment pieces just to keep them level because they were overlapping the foliage a bit. And as a finishing touch, I added some crystal glaze to a couple of the cards just on the berry shaped bits of the die cuts, just to give them a bit of gloss and a bit of dimension. And that brings us to the end of these cards and this video. I do hope you like the cards and that the video's given you some ideas of things you can do in your own card making. If it has, do let me know in the comments, leave a thumbs up, subscribe, ring the notification bell, and I will see you back here very soon for another card making video. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.